Take a slow breath. Let the weight of the day soften. Here, in this quiet corner of words and wonder, stories unfold like incense in the dark, gently, without force. If you find yourself drawn to truths wrapped in human longing, you're in the right place. Subscribe and let the stillness speak. Elena's days were a mosaic of glass towers and late-night emails, her life polished to a corporate sheen. At 32, she was a marketing executive, her name whispered in boardrooms with a mix of awe and envy. Her apartment overlooked the city's restless pulse, its skyline a glittering cage. Yet something stirred beneath her tailored suits and practiced smiles, a restlessness that no promotion could quiet. Her husband, Mark, was the steady anchor she'd once craved. A software engineer with kind eyes and a predictable rhythm, he built their life on quiet routines, coffee at dawn, shared silences over dinner. But those silences had grown heavy, like a fog that muffled her heart's questions. Where was the spark they'd once chased? Where was the version of her that laughed without checking the time? Sophie was her escape, her childhood friend who always knew how to unravel her. Over wine and dimly lit bars, Sophie's laughter was a lifeline. "You're too alive for this, Elena," she'd say, her voice a velvet prod. "You deserve more than Mark's spreadsheets and early bedtimes." Sophie's words were a mirror, reflecting Elena's unspoken hunger. She'd lean closer, her stories of fleeting romances and reckless nights painting a world Elena both feared and craved. Sophie never judged. She only nudged, planting seeds of doubt with a smile. "What's stopping you from feeling alive?" she'd ask, her eyes glinting with something Elena couldn't name: envy, perhaps, or a hunger of her own. The office was where Elena's world began to tilt. Julian joined her team as a consultant, his charm as effortless as sunlight. At 30, he carried a confidence that made heads turn sharp, jawline, quick wit, and a way of looking at her that felt like a secret shared. Their first meeting was innocent, a late-night project, coffee cups littering the conference table, his hand brushing hers as they reached for the same pen. But innocence has a way of slipping. Soon their emails turned personal, laced with a warmth that made her pulse quicken. "You're not like the others here," he'd said one evening, his voice low as they stood by the office window, the city sprawling below. She laughed it off, but his words clung to her like perfume. Elena began to notice the small things, the way Mark's texts went unanswered, the way her reflection in the mirror felt like a stranger's. Sophie's voice echoed in her mind, daring her to chase what set her soul alight. Julian was that flame, or so she thought. Their late-night meetings grew longer, the air between them charged with unspoken promises. One evening, as rain streaked the office windows, Julian's hand lingered on her wrist. "Why do you hold back?" he asked, his gaze stripping away her defenses. She didn't answer, but her heart did a reckless, yearning beat that drowned out the warning whispers of her better self. The rain never stopped that night, a soft curtain that blurred the world outside. Elena and Julian stayed late, the office empty except for the hum of forgotten computers. His touch was no longer accidental, a hand on her shoulder, a linger too long to be chance. When he kissed her, it was like falling into a dream she'd forgotten she wanted. The world narrowed to the heat of his breath, the press of his lips, the reckless pulse that drowned out her guilt. They didn't speak of Mark, or promises, or tomorrows. That first kiss was a spark, and Elena let it ignite. Their affair became a secret rhythm, stolen moments in hotel rooms with crisp white sheets, hurried lunches that stretched into afternoons, whispered confessions in the back of cabs. Julian was a fire she couldn't resist, each encounter burning away the edges of her old life. Sophie was the only one who knew, her eyes gleaming when Elena confessed over late-night cocktails. "You're finally living," Sophie said, her voice a mix of pride and something sharper, like a blade hidden in silk. She pressed for details, her questions hungry, urging Elena to dive deeper into the chaos. "Don't overthink it," she'd say, refilling Elena's glass. "You deserve this." But Elena didn't see the way Sophie's smile tightened, or how her fingers lingered on her phone, as if itching to share a secret. At home, Mark was a shadow in their apartment, his quiet presence a reproach Elena couldn't face. She'd slip into bed late, her skin still warm with Julian's touch, and lie awake, torn between exhilaration and shame. The affair grew reckless. A stolen kiss in the office stairwell, a weekend work trip that was anything but. Elena felt alive, but it was a jagged kind of life, sharp with risk. Julian's promises were vague. He spoke of passion, not plans, and yet she clung to his words, to the way he made her feel seen. One night, after too much wine, Sophie's questions turned pointed. "What if Mark finds out?" she asked, her tone too casual. Elena brushed it off, but the seed was planted. Days later, Mark's phone buzzed with an anonymous text, a photo of Elena and Julian, their hands entwined at a cafe. Sophie's betrayal was silent, surgical, born of a jealousy she'd never admit. She wanted Elena's life to fracture, to prove no one's happiness could outshine her own. Mark's confrontation was quiet, his voice steady but broken. "How long, Elena?" he asked, holding up the photo. The air in their apartment felt like glass, sharp and fragile. She tried to explain, to justify the hunger that had consumed her, but words failed. Mark didn't shout. His silence was worse, a void that swallowed her excuses. Julian, when faced with the fallout, was gone in an instant, his charm replaced by cold detachment. "I thought we were just having fun," he said, already stepping back into his untangled life. Elena stood alone, the wreckage of her choices a heavy cloak. Friends drifted away, Sophie's absence a final sting. The passion she'd chased was now a prison, its bars built from her own desires. Elena sat alone in her apartment, the city's glow a faint pulse through the window. The silence was no longer a refuge but a mirror, reflecting the ache of her choices. She'd chased a flame, only to find it burned everything she held dear. In the quiet, her thoughts wandered to an old book on her shelf, its pages worn from a time when she sought meaning beyond the rush of life. It spoke of a man who sat beneath a tree and saw the world's suffering for what it was, a cycle of wanting, grasping and losing. His words, ancient yet alive, seemed to whisper to her now, "You only lose what you cling to." Elena's heart, raw and open, began to listen. The Buddha taught that suffering begins with desire, a truth Elena felt in her bones. She'd craved Julian's touch, Sophie's approval, a life that felt bigger than her own. But each craving was a chain, binding her to moments that vanished like smoke. The Four Noble Truths unfolded in her mind like a map. Suffering is real, born of attachment. Freedom comes from letting go. Her affair, her betrayal, even Sophie's deceit, they were all threads in a tapestry of longing. She saw now how her hunger for passion had blinded her to Mark's quiet love, to Sophie's hidden motives, to Julian's fleeting promises. The impermanence of it all struck her, the thrill of stolen kisses, the sting of broken trust. None of it lasted, yet she'd staked her heart on it. Karma, too, was a weight she carried. Every choice a kiss, a lie, a moment of weakness had rippled outward, wounding others and returning to wound her. Yet the Buddha's wisdom offered a gentler path, compassion for herself and those she'd hurt. All beings suffer, the teaching said, and Elena saw it clearly: Mark's pain, Sophie's envy, even Julian's cowardice. They were all caught in their own prisons of desire. She closed her eyes, picturing a lotus rising from mud, a symbol of beauty born from struggle. Could she forgive herself? Could she see her flaws not as failures, but as part of her humanness? The Eightfold Path whispered of right intention, right speech, right action, a way to live without adding to the world's pain. Elena breathed deeply, the teachings settling like dust after a storm. The prison wasn't Julian or Mark or Sophie. It was her own mind, clinging to what could never satisfy. Freedom, the Buddha said, lay in seeing clearly, in loosening the grip of want. She wasn't there yet, but the path was before her, lit by small, steady steps. The city hummed outside, indifferent, but in her heart, a quiet resolve began to form, a wish to heal, to rebuild, to find a love that didn't burn, but warmed. The morning light fell softly through Elena's window, painting the room in hues of gold. She sat with a notebook, pen trembling in her hand, not writing yet, just breathing. The teachings had left a seed in her heart, a quiet promise that freedom was possible, even now. The prison of her passions hadn't vanished, but its walls felt less solid, as if she could walk through them with time. The Buddha's wisdom was not a quick fix, but a path, one she could tread with gentle steps. She began to see her life not as a wreckage, but as a garden, overgrown, yet ready for tending. 3 practices, simple yet profound, rose in her mind like lanterns lighting the way forward. First, she would cultivate mindful awareness. Each morning she'd sit for 10 minutes, eyes closed, noticing the rise and fall of her breath. When thoughts of Julian's touch or Sophie's betrayal surfaced, she'd name them desire, hurt, regret, and let them pass like clouds. A journal became her companion, its pages a place to untangle her heart's impulses. What am I seeking? She'd write, tracing the roots of her restlessness. This practice wasn't about erasing desire, but seeing it clearly, choosing which sparks to nurture and which to let fade. Over weeks, she found moments of calm, brief but steady, like stars piercing a clouded sky. Second, she would foster honest communication. Mark had moved out, their apartment now half empty. But Elena reached out with a letter, her words raw and unguarded. I hurt you, and I'm sorry, she wrote. I want to understand if you'll let me. They met for coffee, not to rebuild, but to listen. Mark's voice was quiet, his pain still fresh, but he spoke, and she listened without defense. With others too, she practiced openness, sharing her fears with a therapist, speaking truths she'd once buried. Each conversation was a brick removed from her prison's walls, a reminder that connection, not passion, held the power to heal. Finally, she embraced self-compassion. The shame of her choices had been a heavy cloak, but Elena began to see herself as human, flawed yet worthy. She'd stand before her mirror, meeting her own gaze, and whisper, "You're enough." On hard days, she'd recall the Buddha's words, "You, as much as anyone, deserve your own kindness." A weekly ritual took shape: a walk in the park, sunlight on her pelisse, a cup of tea in hand, letting the world hold her without judgment. These acts were small rebellions against guilt, softening its grip. Slowly she learned to forgive the woman she'd been, making room for the one she was becoming. The city carried on outside, its rhythm unchanged, but Elena's steps felt lighter. The path wasn't easy, but it was hers. Each mindful breath, each honest word, each moment of kindness to herself was a key, unlocking the prison of her past. The lotus in her heart was rising, its roots deep in the mud of her mistakes, its petals reaching for light. If something in this story stayed with you, don't keep it quiet. Share it. Someone else may be waiting for just this kind of reminder. Subscribe for more stories where heartache meets healing and the unseen becomes known. Remember, even the darkest entanglements can lead us back to light.